Jeremy Doran describes himself as an introvert, but that hasn't stopped him from becoming a speaker, a coach, and of course, a podcaster. He hosts NeuroConversant Leadership, and after producing 50 episodes, he has some insight to share. He's built this podcast around his business, and it's helped him to grow his brand and his network. In this episode, we cover the power of using stories to educate, repurposing your podcast content, effective guest booking strategies, when is the right time to consider rebranding your podcast, podcast communication strategies for introverts, equipment advice for podcasters, and much more. If you're looking to align your podcast with your brand and improve your communication skills, this episode is for you. Hi, Jeremy. Thank you for joining me on Podcasting Amplified. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Good. So Jeremy Doran hosts NeuroConversant Leadership. He's a leadership coach who specialises in helping engineers and other STEM professionals become great managers and leaders. Did I cover just about everything people need to know to understand the basics of the podcast?
Yep, that's it in a nutshell.
Cool. So what made you decide to start the podcast? It's about a year you've been podcasting for now, is it?
Almost 47 episodes in.
Yeah, so almost there.
Almost a year. So I do leadership training, as you said. It's a tough transition for anyone to go from being an excellent producer to being a good manager. It's even more difficult for engineers, and I happen to have an engineering background, and I have worked with a lot of engineers. So I started doing public speaking a year and a half ago about how engineers can be better communicators with the rest of the world. And I realized that I want to write a book about it. And the real driving force for starting a podcast was to get a lot of content and material for the book. So I do interviews one week, and they're interviews with people that I want to learn from. And on the other weeks, it's solo, and I just do a lot of research on my own. And so it's helping me learn, and I'm getting to share it with everyone who listens at the same time.
And so it's been running for a year. You said it's 47 episodes in. Have you been pretty much consistent each week with releases? So
far, every Thursday at 6 a.m. I release on both Spotify, and then it goes to everywhere, and on YouTube. And I've alternated each time, whether it's an interview or a solo.
And since then, what kind of benefits have you found that podcasting has had on the business?
So it's a good way to let people get to know you. So if you interact with them through email or networking or whatever it is, they only get a very small snapshot. And being able to say, check out a couple of my podcast episodes. If you like the way I approach this, business, then maybe we can talk some more. So it's kind of a good expanded business card.
Yeah. And I guess it's going to help you get in conversation a bit more in depth than just a sales call or over LinkedIn or whatever. Mm-hmm. So who is your ideal listener? Are they the same people that you'd be coaching then?
Yeah, the ideal would be an engineer, scientist, doctor who has moved into management or just moved up in the company in a way that makes them need to interact outside of their field. So if they're an engineer that needs to start talking to financial investors, or someone who needs to talk outside of their group because they're a team leader maybe, those are great people for me to talk to and to have listened to my podcast.
Cool. And you alternate each week. You've got your 30-minute interviews, and you've also got the roughly 10-minute solo episodes. What made you decide to do both of those? I can see that you've been doing that since the beginning pretty much. And do you have any kind of insight into feedback from listeners, like which format they prefer and so on?
It's interesting. Different people prefer different ones. The reason why I did it is when I'm interviewing, I spend a lot of time asking questions and not a ton of time actually talking and showing what I know. So it seems like a good way to alternate. And sometimes when I'm interviewing someone, they will have a lot of things to say. I'll have a lot of thoughts that I don't necessarily get to. And then that allows me the following week or at another time to kind of dig into all the extra thoughts I had that we didn't have time for in the interview.
And you've had feedback then that some prefer the interviews and some prefer the solo then?
Yeah, some people just want it very short. They're like, 10 minutes, that's great for me. And some people want it to be a little more kind of meaty, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting because I guess it helps you as well with your process. It's a lot of work booking an interview, and then obviously it's quite a long, they're a lot longer, the episodes and so on. Whereas if you get that break every other week where it's just yourself in front of the mic for 10 minutes, or you tell me, maybe it's more work if you have to script things and everything.
It's actually a little bit more work.
Okay.
I use Podmatch, if I'm allowed to name names on here. And it's a relatively easy-ish way to get guests. So that I have kind of a little bit of a backlog. For the solo episodes, I need to do research, and then I almost need to practice it, like write out a script, but I don't really love reading from a script. It just doesn't sound right. So I kind of turn it into what I would do for a presentation. And that way I have all the points, but I'm talking a little bit more naturally, hopefully.
Yeah, so not fully scripted. And so have you had any issues really with booking interview guests? Because just speaking to our clients and also a lot of the people that have guested on this podcast, getting interviews is one of the big challenges, and making sure people show up and so on. Have there been any challenges there for you?
Not really. People reach out to me from Podmatch, and the people who come from there generally have done this enough times that they have a pretty good process, and they show up and their sound quality is usually pretty good. If I question it, then I will have a quick conversation, a week or so ahead of time, just to make sure that everything's going to be working out well. And then sometimes I'm trying on my own to get guests because I just think they would be a really good fit. And it's amazing how willing people are to be in a podcast who would not be willing to sit down and talk to you for 30 minutes otherwise.
Yeah. Because I guess, why do you think that is, actually? Just asking your opinion.
Partly I think it's cool. It has some cachet being on a podcast, and partly it's going to help them promote their business if they're in a sales role. But it's pretty interesting that most people who, if you tried to get an appointment with, wouldn't have the time for you. But if you ask them to do a podcast, they're like, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. I guess it's just a different feel. Like if they know they're going to be able to just sort of talk about their journey for 30 minutes, it's not the same as, can I pitch to you for 30 minutes? Not that you'd say it in that way, but that's what they're going to be expecting.
Right. Yep.
So Podmatch, we haven't actually mentioned this on the podcast before, but I've found it to be really useful. In a way, it's almost too useful. Like I'll get inundated with requests to be on podcasts, and you send out a bunch of requests, thinking maybe 20% of people will agree, and then you've got a whole month full of podcast interviews. So when did you discover Podmatch? Just for the audience, it's basically an interview booking system. So you can either sign up as a guest or a host, and then it matches you up with people. So when did you start using that?
Before I had my podcast. I was not ready to commit to having my own podcast. I was interested in it, but I didn't feel like I could commit to getting it done every week. So I went on Podmatch as a guest, and then I would guest on other people's podcasts. And then after a while, I became comfortable enough that I figured I can start my own. And then I switched to having both. I'm on there both as a guest and as a host.
Yeah, good practice if you can do some guest slots first.
Yeah.
And then you're also doing video as well, I noticed. Was that right from the start that you decided to do video?
Yeah, I use Riverside for my recording, and it records video. And I figured it's if I'm going to do this, I might as well just start with video as well. And then I'll put the interview on YouTube with the video. And now Spotify actually has video in it as well, which it didn't when I started, but then it switched to having video as well. So yeah, I always do that. And I find that I have to let guests know ahead of time, because sometimes they think it's going to be audio only. And when they find out it's video, they're like, oh, I need to get dressed up or put on makeup or whatever it is.
Yeah, I feel like that might start to become common knowledge soon enough, because it's always been an audio first medium. But recently, I think most people who are starting a podcast are at least thinking of doing some video content alongside it, because it just helps with the reach and everything.
One thing I found personally, I don't know if other people will feel the same way, when I'm on Podmatch and someone reaches out to me, I think it's great. Usually they're a decent fit, sometimes they're not. But when they have someone who does bookings for them reach out on their behalf, I find that much less useful, because it tends to be less focused on me, and they're just trying to get as many bookings as they can. So it's much less often a good fit, and it's a lot longer. It's always just a ton of information talking about how great a guest this person is, but they wouldn't be a great guest for me necessarily.
Yeah, I feel that. I've had similar experiences, and it seems like they're more focused on the person they're working for rather than the people they're reaching out to. And I've had quite a few requests. I try and make it as clear as possible that we interview podcasters, people who have an active podcast, and probably more than half of the requests I get are from people who don't have an active podcast. So,
oh really?
Yeah, I think because it's quite a specific thing that you can't add into your tags or anything like that. You can find that out if you go onto my page, and I think people are trying to sort of churn through them so quickly. Whereas, if you fit in their criteria in terms of the niche, then it's more likely that it's going to be a good fit. Maybe that's something I need to think about, my very specific requirements, or maybe it's something they could add that's more upfront in terms of how Podmatch do things. And there are other options as well. Like I've used Matchmaker, which is quite a good one for booking guests. But Podmatch I've found to be the best as well. And then just speaking a bit more about your podcast specifically, you changed the name. Can you tell us a bit more about why you changed the name and how the focus changed and how that experience was, if it's been easy for your guests, not your guests, your listeners and everything to change along with you?
It took some cycles to come to the decision that I actually wanted to do it, and then what I wanted to change the name to. The driving force was actually marketing. I have a coaching business, which has the name Pinnacle Performance. I had a podcast, which was called How to Talk to Weirdos. And if people were asking where to go to learn more about me, I was kind of directing them in two different places, and it was getting confusing. I also do keynote speaking, and the website for that is Jeremy Doran Speaks. So I was sending people to three different places, and it was confusing, and I didn't like it. So I changed the name of the podcast to NeuroConversant Leadership. I'm in the process of changing the name of my business to NeuroConversant Leadership. And when I write the book, the title of the book is going to be NeuroConversant something. I'll figure out the byline afterwards. But it was really just a way to try and combine everything into one place, one consistent message.
Yeah, I like that, because it's a brand name as the podcast title, but it's very obvious what the podcast is about. It's not like it's a made-up word that you're using for your business name. Like my business is called Claricast. If I called the podcast Claricast, it would make no sense to anyone. but it looks like this works. And then you've got your name on there, so it's still got that personal branding as well, which I'm sure is a big part of why you started the podcast to begin with, for your personal brand as well.
Yep. It's a good way to let people get to know you and then find out if they want to come and do work with you.
And when you started podcasting, which sort of skills did you already have that you felt really helped you get started with podcasting? And obviously you do speaking, which I'm sure helps as well, but was there, and you can speak a bit more about that, and was there anything else that helped become a podcaster, so to speak?
I would say two things. One is I'm very much of an introvert, which seems odd, but what that has always helped me to do is ask questions. So I've gotten very good at asking questions, more so than I am at speaking when I'm just in groups of people. But then, even though I'm an introvert, public speaking I'm very comfortable doing, which helps with the solo episodes. And interestingly, a lot of public speakers are very introverted. It's a interesting conundrum. A second thing that I think is helpful is I do improv. And improv is really good way to actively listen to people and adjust on the fly. So if someone gives me an answer that I was absolutely not expecting, improv has given me practice to just relax and this is what we're dealing with now, and then you go with that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. It's something, I mean, I'd say I'm an introvert as well, and when I first started creating content, it was on YouTube and it was quite heavily scripted, and I just found that was easier for me, not having to think as much on the fly of what to say. But then when it came to when I've done speaking before and then podcasting, guesting, I found that a lot more difficult because, you've got to sort of think on your feet a bit more. So it felt like sort of the other way around for me. It helped doing podcasting helped with that. But yeah, improv sounds like it could really help. And then as an introvert, would you have any advice for anyone else who is introverted but is not at that stage yet where they want to start producing content but something's holding them back?
A lot of it is just practice. The way I got good at public speaking was actually in high school. I hated when we had to do presentations in front of the class, but we had one teacher who made us do it every other week. So I got so used to doing it that it became more comfortable. And one of the things that is initially really tough with podcasting is editing. You have to then watch and listen to yourself. And it's just kind of horrifying to hear, like, I hate my voice. I don't like the way I look. Everything's bad. I say too much and so I just said so. See it? It is hard to watch yourself, but you get used to that too. I was talking to someone who said, watch yourself once a day for 30 days and you'll get over it. So if you just take any video of yourself and just watch it, you eventually become to be able to accept watching and editing yourself, which I think is a hurdle for some people, knowing that they're going to then have to watch and listen to themselves.
Yeah, just exposure and practice then, which I'm sure some people don't necessarily want to hear, that they've just got to kind of throw themselves into it. But yeah, I mean, everyone listening to this podcast is either thinking about starting a podcast or they're already running a podcast. But yeah, I guess there are different ways that you can sort of ease yourself into it, depending on what you're most comfortable with. Like if you find guesting on another podcast is less high stakes, I don't know how you felt about that. Did you feel it was easier guesting on others, or did you feel it was easier when you started your own?
It depends on the interviewer. I found that some interviewers just make life easy and fun, and the whole thing's great. And some of them will kind of come out of the blue with questions, and then you have to scramble, and that's when the improv comes in helpful.
Yeah.
So I think being a guest when someone is a good interviewer is the easiest. Sometimes when I'm doing the interviewing, the other person will talk so much that I don't really need to even ask questions. I will ask them one question and they will just go, and I'll have to find a way to wedge some words in there.
Yeah,
So
which
it
works.
depends.
Yeah, as long as they understand who your target listener is and they don't start talking for half an hour nonstop about something
Right.
too irrelevant.
The good news is I have editing power afterwards, so
True.
if I need to cut things out, I can.
Yeah. Well, I'll try not to throw you too many curveballs.
No, so far this has been fun.
But yeah, circling back to the pod match thing, that kind of helps in that area because you're interviewing people who have experience with interviewing and guesting and so on. Cool. Okay. And then how are you getting the word out about the podcast? I see you're putting content out on your website and you've got your LinkedIn. Do you have any particular marketing strategy for it, or is it just sharing it each week?
I would love to hear from you because I think this is the thing that I'm least good at. So I do, when I release an episode, I'll take whatever I think the best clip is and put it on LinkedIn. And it's a great way to thank the person because I will tag them in it, and Instagram. And then when I go to like networking events or do talks, I will reference the podcast. And this is a good one. My sister got me a t-shirt that said, "Ask me about my podcast." And sometimes I'll be out and about wearing it and forgetting that I'm wearing it. And someone will say, "Hey, do you have a podcast?" I'm like, "How did you know I have a Oh,
Yeah.
right. It's on my shirt." Yes. So I think that's kind of a silly thing, and it's only one by one. But I think if you can do some sort of branding, just on your person, that's probably a good idea that I should start doing, getting more branded material.
Yeah, you'd be very lucky to find the right kind of person in the street. But if you wore that shirt
Right.
to a networking event in your industry, then that could work.
Right.
But yeah, it is a
yeah.
difficult one, isn't it? And especially these days, it's becoming more of a challenge to get found. But the fact that you are listening to sort of feedback, and when people say they want to keep it short, and you're editing it, the cover art looks nice. You've thought about the name as well. I think that is the first step, making sure that kind of packaging is right, so that when you do send people to it, they're actually going to stick around. And yeah, the fact that you're sharing clips as well, and the fact that you have the video makes that easier too, which is going to help.
And I listen to other podcasts on podcasting, and one thing they say over and over again is it takes time.
Yeah.
There's something magical that happens, and depending on who you listen to at 100 episodes, all of a sudden there's just enough there that people have listened to maybe the back episodes, and when they come in, they see that it's, got all those, and it catches on easier. So what I've done for my happiness and sanity is focus on the original driving force, which was to get content to write a book so that I can learn all these things from my research and from people. And as long as that's happening, then the guests are kind of a follow-on. And so if I don't focus too much on it, then it doesn't bother me that it's not growing as fast as I would like it to.
Yeah, sometimes it is just a case of keep doing what you're doing and wait, because it's like with growing any kind of content channel. Like my YouTube channel took a couple of years before it started to, that was producing a video every single week for a couple of years before it got monetized and before it started picking up exponentially. And yeah, it's the same with podcasting, and that's what we say. Like you say, 100 episodes, which is a couple of years, which is what we recommend, that you need to go in with a mindset of, I'm going to do this for a couple of years before I can expect to see any real growth. But even without that exponential growth, you could still find that it's bringing you value, even if you got 1 or 2 clients in your first year. If they're high value clients, then it might have already justified the time you spent on the podcast.
Yeah. And like I said, the learning's there, and just credibility. Even if they don't listen to the podcast, if you can say, I've got a podcast on this topic, it automatically kind of raises you up a level in people's estimation.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of monetization, I'm guessing this is just as content marketing for your business. You're not selling anyone else's products, anything like that. You haven't...
Correct.
Yeah.
It's just, for me, business-wise, a way to get people to know, like, and trust me, so that they will then, use my services.
Nice. And then what has been the biggest challenge, would you say, so far in the last year with the podcast?
I think technology keeps changing so quickly, and getting, I got what I thought was the right equipment, and then, after I've been doing it for a while, I'm like, oh, I need to change my equipment, or I can change my equipment. And there's always opportunities to do more things and get more services. And so I've gotten to the point now where I say no until I'm absolutely sure that I need a new thing, because I don't want to keep buying new cameras and microphones and that sort of thing.
So is that more the hardware side of things or software?
Well, both. And those, I use Riverside, as I said, and they keep adding technology where they didn't used to be able to make small video clips without me manually making them. Now there's a button that you press and it comes up with what it thinks are good 1-minute clips. And I used to use a different company for that. So I bought a year's service, and then all of a sudden Riverside also does it. And so I didn't need the whole year of that other one. So that's why I try to say no to things, because everything's a great idea.
Yeah, they make it a hard sell with those sort of yearly subscriptions. You save money, but then they're all just constantly sort of chasing each other. Like you say, one company will bring out some feature, and then all the others scramble to add that to their system. And I can see that you got, is that a Shure MV7, your microphone?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the microphone I'm using as well. Did you struggle with the microphone choice beforehand then?
I started with the Scarlett 2i2 podcasting set. And it's, got a decent microphone, and it's got I can't think of the word for what that little board is that everything plugs in through.
Yeah, the interface.
And then headphones, so it had everything that I would need to start, but it wasn't as simple as this. This MV7 just plugs right into my laptop. So less equipment, and I find that I don't need the big, heavy headphones. Just having earbuds works just as well. So, but, until you're doing it, you can do all the research in the world, and you can find a good solution, and then you do it for a while. You're like, oh, I didn't actually need that.
Yeah, and there's so much conflicting info on the internet of what's right and so on. But yeah, the MV7 USB, that's what we recommend to everyone, just because it's simple. And if you're recording just the one of you in the room, then that's sort of all you need, really.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And then what's coming next for the podcast? Is it just a case of continuing how things are going, or you got any plans for the next year of episodes?
The thing that I would like to shift more towards is having people who are potential clients come on as guests on my podcast. So up until now, I've largely been getting people who have an expertise in something that I want to learn about. I would like to start using the podcast as a way to get warm introductions to people that I would like to have as clients.
Yeah, that's a nice shift. Like you've picked up all this information the first year, and then shifting for the second year to more direct client outreach. I like that.
It was about a couple of months ago when I realized that I'd kind of caught up to the podcast.
Yeah.
I felt like in the beginning I was just scrambling to catch up and be able to get episodes out. And then at one point, all of a sudden, I felt like, okay, I got this. And now that I feel like I have a pretty decent process, it's now time to make the podcast work for me rather than me work for it. So that's when I decided to try and make that shift and move things forward that way. It was a pretty good feeling once I felt like I wasn't chasing it anymore, and now I can start using it and kind of bending it to my will.
Nice. Okay. Well, we'll wrap things up around here. I just want to say, like, everyone can find you on LinkedIn, Jeremy Doran, and again, NeuroConversant Leadership on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. I just listened to the storytelling episode, which you released last week, which was very interesting. And being able to put across information in a way that sticks in people's minds by using stories. So I think for podcasters, it's only about 7 minutes long. If you haven't really been using story to tell, especially if you've got an educational podcast, then that's a really nice, quick listen for people if they want to get value from that.
You know, you asked earlier about what value I get out of podcasting, and there's one I forgot, is the research that I do and the podcasts that I do, especially the solo ones, can get built into my keynote talks later. So I just did this last episode about why storytelling works. I incorporated that into a talk that I did last week at a conference, and that got added in. So it's also helped me build content for my talks.
Yeah, and it's nice. I know they always have quite strict time limits as well, and you've got a lot of episodes to pick from. That I guess have different focuses, so I can see how that could work nicely, and repurposing into talks and things. Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. Is there anywhere else that you'd like people to find you?
Yeah, NeuroConversantLeadership.com is the easiest, and it's got links to all the episodes as well as links to my social media and that sort of thing.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jeremy, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And all the best with the podcast for the next year. I'll be keeping a close eye.
That sounds good. I like listening to yours as well.
Cheers, Jeremy. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Podcasting Amplified. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We'll be back next time with another conversation offering more insights to take your podcast to the next level and help you to achieve success. Happy podcasting.